Upon my granddaughter Amy starting high school, we decided to take a family trip to celebrate. The day before our trip, everyone decided to stay over at our house, and that night, I had the chance to talk with my daughter Sarah alone for the first time in a while. It was a free-flowing conversation, but I felt most at ease when I was with her. After having a little alcohol, she said I'm going to bed and returned to her room. I was about to head to bed too, when I noticed Amy's diary, which she must have taken out of her bag and forgotten about, sitting in the corner of the empty living room. I should give this back to her tomorrow. As I picked it up, there was a small spider underneath. Startled, I dropped the diary. By chance, it opened to the page for tomorrow's date of the family trip, where it was written the day my family is breaking down. Family breakdown? I couldn't grasp what that meant, and as I tried to pick up the notebook, Amy appeared behind me and snatched it away in a panic. Her strange demeanor prompted me to blurt out, "Family breakdown, what does that mean?" She silently retrieved iced tea from the fridge, poured it into a glass, and took a sip. The house was already quiet as everyone had gone to bed. The kitchen was dark, with just the small light above the sink illuminating it. Under that light, she turned back towards me, staring intently into my eyes, but not saying a word. Her downcast expression looked sad and lonely, like a portrait. Just as she was about to open her mouth slightly, Sarah stuck her head out from the bedroom with a "Tomorrow's an early day, go to bed now." Amy and I exchanged glances, silently nodding at each other, then said goodnight. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to stop thinking about the meaning of those words, "the day my family is breaking down." My name is Catherine Smith, 63 years old. My husband John, 5 years younger than me, has always been very conscious of being the younger one ever since we met. There was a time when I took pride in having a younger husband. From a young age, Sarah was never very attached to John. He also didn't seem too interested in his own daughter, spending his weekends holed up in his room, engrossed in his model kit hobby. I felt sorry for Sarah, so I tried my best to interact with her as much as I could. During meals, I'd sometimes catch Sarah glancing over at John. Her gaze clearly had disdain, but also a hint of wanting something, like some kind of expectation. I think deep down, Sarah wanted to play with her father. But she couldn't express that well. That's what I realized later on. From my 30s onward, it felt like my life was consumed by work. By the time Sarah became an adult, I was mentally drained and ended up retiring. I don't think I was very attentive when Sarah was little. When we first married, my younger husband's income was unstable, and I desperately wanted money so Sarah could live comfortably. I was convinced that money would make Sarah happy. That's really what I believed back then. John was the type of a person to prioritize his hobbies over Sarah. Apparently not liking the sight of her dad always gaming, Sarah had been cold towards him since her teenage years. There were so many arguments with her calling him out for just sitting around playing games like a child, while he completely lacked any sense of crisis. But my husband's excuse was always, "I work for this family. What's wrong with enjoying myself at home?" As much as his constant gaming bothered me, my feelings never seemed to get through to him. After Sarah got married and moved out, I felt so alone in that house. Sitting alone in the living room, aimlessly watching TV, I couldn't help but feel the urge to call Sarah. "Hey, Sarah? You doing okay?" "I'm fine. If you don't have anything important, don't call me." Whenever I called Sarah, I always got a cold response. After hanging up, I couldn't shake off the self-loathing, thinking maybe Sarah was cold towards me because I made her feel lonely since she was young. John was always lost in his own world. He took up diorama making after his model kits and gaming, turning his room into a world of its own. Gradually, I stopped expecting anything from John. I stopped asking him to go out with me or to take me shopping. Then, John, like a fish to water, immersed himself in his hobbies, and we stopped having any real conversations at home. But every month, his hard-earned salary was deposited into our account, and he would compliment the meals I cooked. I was at a loss for words to express the discontent bubbling inside me and had no one to confide in. That's probably why I became so dependent on Sarah, who must have had her grievances with John too. After getting married, Sarah lived in a condo within biking distance. She married a man named Steve, and the following year, my granddaughter Amy was born. I expected Sarah to come back home once Amy was born, but she never did. Neither she nor Steve relied on his parents. Instead, both took parental leave simultaneously. Considering both worked full-time and devoted themselves to childcare, I frequently called, worried. Sarah seldom answered my calls. When she finally did, I'd ask, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, sort of." Sarah's tone was flat, devoid of inflection. I had hoped Sarah would reach out, saying she was tired and needed help, but she never did. Why won't she rely on me? After hanging up, standing alone in the living room, I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. This continued until Amy turned 3, when everything changed abruptly. Steve had already returned to work, but now it was Sarah's turn to resume her job, so she asked me to take care of Amy, including kindergarten drop-offs and pickups, until she returned home. At the time, I was working as a cashier at a local supermarket, but I quit to take care of Amy's needs. Ever since she was little, Amy had a habit of fixating her large eyes and staring intently into others' eyes. An insightful gaze, as if trying to read the other person's feelings. Walking home from kindergarten with Amy, she suddenly started to cry silently without saying a word. "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" Amy just pursed her lips and shook her head slightly, wiping away her tears. Holding my hand tightly, the young Amy seemed to be seeking comfort. "What's the matter? Are you hurt? Did something happen at kindergarten?" It had only been 3 days since Amy started attending kindergarten. With her eyes still reddened, Amy continued to stare at me. "Why? Why won't you tell me anything?" On the way home, we took a detour and strolled hand in hand. Sitting on a bench in the nearby large park, we felt the warm breeze of April on our skin. The splendidly blooming yellow mimosa nearby had slightly wilted, drooping towards the ground. "I want to eat at Grandma's house." Hearing these softly uttered words, I couldn't help but hug Amy tightly, feeling warmth spreading through my chest. How adorable she is. Amy, quiet and reserved, always preferred reading encyclopedias and books at home over talking much. Respecting Amy's personality, I didn't force her to play physically but instead read novels beside her. This very natural relationship between us, like the air we breathe, continued even as Amy became an 8th grader, with her coming over for dinner before heading home every day. Although Amy was a good student without needing to attend cram school, she seemed distracted from her studies. She would study in the living room until dinner was ready after school. While cooking, I'd glance over at Amy, only to find her staring blankly at the wall. "Amy, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Amy looked at me with a distant gaze, hesitating for a moment before shaking her head slightly. Same old Amy, I thought. Whenever something unpleasant or difficult happens, she always retreats into her own quiet world. Like shutting herself into a protective shell, not allowing anyone in. I find that side of Amy endearing. She must have a strong heart, facing any hardship by relying solely on her own strength. Later, Amy got accepted into her fallback high school, and her dream school too. After a long time, Sarah called me. "Amy is amazing. She got into that top-notch high school of her choice." Sarah's voice, excitedly talking about Amy's success, made me chuckle involuntarily. Then she suggested a family trip to celebrate Amy's success. After the stressful study period, Amy seemed a bit deflated, gazing absent-mindedly at the handmade swag hanging in my living room. "What's that?" "It's a swag. A bunch of flowers and leaves tied together and hung on the wall. A friend gave it to me." I was delighted that Amy noticed and mentioned the swag, adorned with yellow mimosa as its centerpiece, for the first time. John, my husband, hardly notices changes in the living room or new flowers, as he's always cooped up in his room gaming unless it's mealtime. The trip sounds fun. Sarah and Steve have been too busy with work to go on a trip before. I just hope I won't be intruding. Amy gave me a half-hearted yeah. In response, the day before the family trip, it was decided that Sarah's family would all stay at our house. On the day of the trip, John was to pick up a rental van early in the morning, and we planned to head to a hot spring resort with him driving. That night, I had the chance to talk with Sarah, just the two of us, for the first time in a while. We chatted about everything from Sarah's job, Steve's work, an eccentric neighbor, to the new home center that opened recently. It was a rambling conversation, but being with Sarah felt the most comfortable to me. While Amy was in the bath, I took out a present I had prepared for tonight from the closet. Seeing it, Sarah asked while sipping a wine cooler, "Is this for Amy's entrance celebration?" I got this bag because Amy has been wanting it. It was a backpack from a popular outdoor brand, and Amy always carried a sports brand backpack. Sarah looked surprised and glanced at the mimosa hanging on the wall. I didn't know Amy wanted something from that brand. Amy sometimes follows people with bags from this brand with her eyes when we go shopping together. She's not one to say she wants it, but it shows in her gaze. Sarah stared at me. After finishing the little alcohol left in her bottle, she gulped it down and said, "I'm going to bed," then headed to the bedroom. As Amy came out of the bath, I gave her the backpack. With her hair still wet and wrapped in a towel, Amy hugged the backpack and gave me a small smile. Amy started transferring her belongings from her old bag to the new one. After my bath, I returned to the living room, but it seemed everyone had gone to bed. In a corner of the now empty living room lay a notebook Amy had apparently taken out of her bag and forgotten. I should give this back to her tomorrow. As I picked it up, there was a small spider underneath. Startled, I dropped the diary. Upon seeing a page accidentally flipped open with "The day my family is breaking down" written under tomorrow's date for the family trip, I couldn't grasp the meaning of those words. As I bent down to pick up the diary, Amy suddenly appeared behind me, hastily snatching it from my hand with a flustered look. Caught off guard by her peculiar behavior, I inadvertently asked, "What does the day my family is breaking down mean?" Amy quietly fetched barley tea from the fridge in the kitchen, poured it into a cup, and took a sip without a word. The house had settled down for the night. The kitchen was dim, lit only by a small light above the sink. Underneath that light, Amy turned around, her gaze fixed on mine, her expression dropping silently, painting a portrait of loneliness and sadness. Just as Amy began to slightly open her mouth to speak, Sarah peeked out from the bedroom, advising, "It's early tomorrow, go to bed now." Amy and I exchanged glances, nodded silently to each other, and said good night. That night, I lay awake, troubled by the phrase "the day my family is breaking down" and its meaning. The next morning, we all set off to the hot spring resort in the rental car my husband had fetched. Despite the holiday traffic, the weather was splendid, with a clear, blue sky stretching over the distant mountains. I was moved to be visiting the inn, where I had taken Sarah several times in her childhood, now with my granddaughter in tow. I was relaxing on the chair in the lounge. Next to me, Amy was also having a cup of hot chocolate. "If you have any worries, feel free to talk to me." Looking up at the cloudless blue sky from the large window, I could only muster. After that, we relished delicious food and returned to our room. At Sarah's request, we all stayed in the same room, making it a family sleepover. John and Steve were exchanging drinks, enjoying each other's company after a long time. As night fell, Amy gazed out the window in a spacious corner of the suite room, equipped with a pair of chairs and a table. I sat down in front of Amy and handed her some orange juice. Without a word, I too quietly gazed out the window. The moon could be seen above the numerous accommodations. Steve, perhaps tipsy, wrapped his arm around Amy's shoulder and burst into laughter. "Amy really did great. Make sure to keep up the good work in your studies, okay?" "Yes. It's a boarding school, right? We won't be able to have dinner together like before. Since Sarah got married and left home, I've been feeling lonely all this time. Taking care of my granddaughter Amy was always fun, but realizing it's coming to an end makes me feel lonely again." Steve and Sarah cheerfully encouraged Amy, who was absent-mindedly gazing out the window. "You'll do great from now on. Sarah gently stroked Amy's hair. Live with your heart content. Living with your heart content, what a heavy phrase that is. As I pondered the meaning of Sarah's words, Amy suddenly laughed. It was clear that she wasn't laughing because something was funny. She wore a mocking, forced smile and exclaimed, "It's really ridiculous," without any joy. When Amy stopped laughing, her bizarre behavior silenced everyone. "I'm done. I'll spill it all." "What?" Amy, still seated, stared at me. "Grandma. After this trip, we might not see each other again, and we won't be able to have dinner together, so I'll tell you everything." In the corner of the space by the window, there was a low stand and a transparent vase with dimly lit mimosa inside it. Unable to withstand Amy's intense gaze, I found myself staring at the mimosa in front of me. After we return from the trip, I'm moving to an apartment. I'll have to take care of household chores and study. I probably won't have any free time until I graduate. Wait. I thought you were going to be in a dormitory for high school. What's going on, Sarah? When I asked Sarah, Steve answered with a smile, "It's for her independence. Amy says she wants to get a job and move out right after graduating high school. Living in an apartment rather than a dormitory would be better for her future, we thought. But letting a girl who's just been a middle schooler live alone." I was at a loss for words, not understanding the norms of today's world, and Amy abruptly raised her voice, "That's not true. I wanted to live with Grandma and commute to high school. But both Mom and Dad objected. They didn't want to have dinner with me either." I tilted my head in confusion. It sounded as if Sarah and Steve were against me being involved with Amy. "Mom and Dad thought I might spill some secrets to Grandma, so they didn't want me to interact too much." "Amy, stop talking now." Over Sarah's shout, Amy yelled back, "Shut up. Both Mom and Dad have been having affairs forever. Yes, since I was in kindergarten." I felt as if I'd been struck on the head by Amy's words. Sarah is having an affair. Steve too? What does this mean? I couldn't comprehend it all. "I've always been left at Grandma's house, not just because they were busy with work, but because they've been meeting their lovers all this time." Steve, clearly disturbed by Amy's revelations, denied her words while aimlessly opening a window in the room. A breeze blew in from outside, causing the curtains to flutter. Grasping the swaying curtains, Steve fell silent. "You're misunderstanding something, Amy. We were just thinking of your future. There's no need to pretend just because Grandma is here. I don't want you acting like good parents after all you've done." Sarah and Steve have been having affairs with others for quite some time. Their relationship started back when Amy was in kindergarten, and she had been aware of it from the beginning. As a child, Amy had a vague sense that her parents were doing something wrong that needed to be kept secret, and she couldn't bring herself to talk to me about it. Sarah never took care of Amy's meals or daily needs. Although Amy could manage school preparations and laundry on her own, she couldn't cook because she wasn't allowed to handle fire. So, having dinner at my house became a daily routine, a habit that continued up to this very moment. Did you know? When I was in elementary school, right next to me, Mom would pretend to have normal conversations while actually talking to her lover on the phone. Didn't she realize her voice changed? Amy had eyes filled with deep resentment. Sarah was speechless, and Steve continued to stare out the window. In Amy's eyes, there was a quiet rage, her brow furrowed deeply, and her lips slightly twisted. "Once I leave home, you two will divorce and remarry someone unknown, right? That's why I'm in the way. Fine by me. I've always been alone. I won't feel lonely now." The occasional ragged breath from the slightly trembling Amy was the only sound dominating the room. The frustration with the harsh reality seemed to be exploding inside Amy. "I've always been alone," Amy said. "I see." I've always been right beside Amy since she was little, but that wasn't enough. Amy, who's always been reticent, must have been deeply hurt and burdened by her parents' affairs from a young age. I was always focused on my own loneliness, oblivious to Amy's deeper solitude and tears. Unaware of this, I was always fixated on my own loneliness. Well, these things are basically the mother's fault. Adultery or not, it's Sarah's fault for leaving her daughter alone. It's your fault for caring too much about how others see us and not agreeing to divorce. Besides, for someone so concerned about appearances, you haven't been promoted either. What a pathetic man. I stood up and called out Sarah and Steve's names. It was unusual for me to raise my voice. My body heated up, and my knees trembled. I choked up and couldn't get the first words out. But in front of me, Amy, who looked at me with anxious eyes, I couldn't just run away without saying anything. Parents must always put their children first. No matter the situation, children should be the priority. Protecting the family is a parent's duty. Can you even imagine how much Amy was hurt knowing her own parents were having affairs? Can you imagine how sad she was? As I yelled in anger, I realized that I couldn't even imagine it myself. No one here could possibly understand Amy's feelings. If they did, Sarah and Steve wouldn't have continued their actions. Confused by my continuing anger, Sarah and Steve. I gathered my thoughts and spoke up. I can't leave Amy with such selfish parents. I will protect her. Amy will stay with me. There's no need for her to live in an apartment. She can go to high school from my house. Stunned by my declaration, all three of them, but then only Amy began to tear up. As Sarah and Steve silently exchanged looks, I hugged Amy, who cried without making a sound, tightly. Amy, you will become my daughter. From now on, I will always be by your side. Held in my arms, Amy didn't try to leave. The ride back from the trip was awkward, to say the least. John, the only one in the driver's seat, cheerfully hummed tunes, seemingly content with how relaxing the hot springs were and pondering what souvenirs would please the girls at his office. Amidst that turmoil, he slept carefree in his bed, undisturbed. He's quite a character. Upon returning from the trip, I immediately invited Amy to our home. John looked puzzled, but I casually mentioned, "You can use the room Sarah used to use, right?" Though I had impulsively declared I'd take Amy in as my own child, he did most of the legwork, researching and handling most of the procedures. Grateful for everything, I deeply thanked my laid-back husband, who just flashed me a grin. I love you, you know. I can pull myself together for your sake. Always playing with games and models in his younger days, yet when it matters, he gets things done. And he's always so youthful and handsome. Being my younger husband, it's somewhat frustrating. Amy started going to school from our place. She's still a child, after all. I wish for her to have a fulfilling school life, filled with club activities and fun, leaving adult concerns like household chores to us. Sarah and Steve didn't end up divorcing. Apparently, their affair partners weren't interested in remarrying, so the ambiguous relationship continued as before. However, one day, their workplace discovered the affair, leading to their resignation. The resignation due to the affair was a bit baffling, but it seems the news spread to their clients and many others, exposing the affair to a wide audience. Left alone after her affair partner fled, Sarah became isolated. Then, one day, she called. "Let me see Amy. She's my child. I want to live with you and be with her." "No, Sarah, you can't. You wanted to put Amy in an apartment instead of a dormitory. You didn't like the idea of her being protected by dorm rules and regulations. You wanted her in an apartment so you could summon her anytime, right? I understand you're lonely, but you're not like me. Sarah, you don't seem to truly want Amy's happiness. So, I can't forgive you." I had resolved not to forgive her. The day I might forgive her would be when Amy forgives her. But for Amy, who's always known her parents' infidelity, could such a day ever come? While cooking dinner, I quietly told Amy, who was reading a book, Sarah came today, and shared the news about her job loss and how her affair partner had abandoned her. Amy, uninterested, kept her gaze on her book. Serves her right. That icy response made me realize. Perhaps Amy was the one who leaked the affair to Sarah and Steve's company and clients. Sitting in the living room chair, I let out a small sigh. Amy, do you realize? Parents don't necessarily have to provide for their children through college. Many parents in the world seem to think that once their child turns 18, their responsibilities end and they should just move out and become independent. What you did was an act of foolish revenge. But I don't intend to blame you for it. Amy, I wonder if you'll realize one day. That day, when you got accepted into your desired school, and Sarah called me to share the joy. She was overjoyed at your success. She was proud and truly relieved. I'm convinced I felt a deep maternal love from her at that moment. I hope there will come a day when you can forgive her. I stopped cooking dinner and spoke to Amy, who was reading a book. My husband will be upstairs building his model kits until I call him down for dinner. Hey, Amy, how about we go out for some burgers? Amy quietly closed her book, looked up at me, and flashed a grin. From now on, I'll make sure this child is happy. Without calling my husband, I went out to eat with just Amy and me. As I fumbled with my shoes at the entrance and wobbled a bit, Amy supported my shoulder. Before I could express my gratitude, Amy murmured something. It was a very soft voice, but it reached my ears clearly. Thank you. I will never forget the gentle smile Amy showed me at that moment for the rest of my life.